It's time for episode 3 of Marketing Mentors, and today we're talking about visualization and data and analytics. We're also going to talk about a tool called Datorama from Salesforce, and we're going to talk about how it can help you as a marketer unlock ROI and find opportunities in your data. I'm speaking with Sebastian Ritz, who's the account executive at Salesforce in ASEAN for Datorama. So join Sebastian and I as we get into this really exciting and important topic for marketers, visualization and data. Sebastian Ritz, it's great to have you on our third ever episode of Marketing Mentors, the podcast. Today we're going to talk about a subject that's really quite close to my heart. I've been a marketer well before I was in consulting, and analytics and visualization for marketers are two of the most exciting subjects that I found when I was in my marketing career. So today we're going to talk about analytics, visualization, and also a tool that Salesforce has called Datorama. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Sebastian, you're the expert on this at Salesforce Digital 360 in the region. So why don't I pass over to you, maybe a quick intro, and then we'll talk about Datorama.
Yeah, that sounds good. And thanks for having me, Jimmy. So quick little intro on myself. As Jimmy mentioned, I am kind of the Datorama specialist here in Singapore. I've been in the world of analytics actually my whole life. I started in the world of traditional BI, data warehousing. And actually over the last 3 to 4 years, I've hyper-focused all those efforts on marketing. So for the last 4 years, I've been at a company called Datorama. I've been at Salesforce now since the acquisition for 3 years. And every time a customer says anything related to measurement, marketing ROI, marketing data analytics, that's really my specialty and when I start to jump in.
Unfortunately, in this section of the podcast, we lost audio very briefly, but I asked Sebastian to tell us a little bit more about Datorama, what it is, its features and functions, and also to explain how it's not just a visualization tool, but does a lot more than that in terms of analytics and data analysis and transformation.
Has kind of drastically changed, I would say, over the last 3 to 5 years. And I think due to COVID, things have been kind of put into acceleration. So when you look at marketing, right, marketers, and when you boil it down, are really trying to drive growth for the business, right? If I'm an insurance company, I'm trying to drive policy sales. If I'm a venue, I try to drive ticket sales. If I'm a B2B organization, maybe I'm trying to get you to come to my website, download a piece of content, right, become a lead. I think at the end of the day, though, marketers now more than ever are being held accountable. Right. So I think long gone are the days of just being able to engage in marketing in hopes of getting the name out there. Right. Marketers are being asked by C-suites, by their mentors, their bosses, what's the ROI? What's the impact that our marketing campaigns are having on the business? And I think what makes that really, really challenging for a lot of marketers is the fact that we don't just communicate with people on one channel. Right. So we're not just sending emails. We've got, in reality, email campaigns. We've got a website. We've got social media campaigns. Maybe we're doing programmatic advertising, some billboard stuff. Maybe we've got an agency. Maybe we've got 5 agency partners, right, that are helping us do some of these initiatives. And really, marketers are struggling to answer a super simple question, which is what on earth is actually working to drive success for the business, and what is not working so I can become smarter, right, and hold every single marketing dollar accountable. And I think in a nutshell, from day one, that's what Datorama was purpose-built to do, right? It was, how do I bring all of this complexity, simplify it, and provide one place for the marketer to quickly answer the question of what is working well, what's not working well, and honestly, where are we wasting money? And to your point, I think this goes far beyond just the world of data visualization, right? When we think about what marketers are really challenged with, it's not that I can't create a pretty bar graph or a donut chart. I think I'll be honest, Jamie, that's kind of table stakes these days, right? I think the challenge is on the one hand on the data side. So how do I make sense of all of this data? When you think about marketing data, it lives in so many different locations, right? So translating that into a single place, into a single language, so you can quickly answer that question of what's working is one aspect of the equation that we tackle. But the other that's super important is, I think, helping marketers turn insight into action, right? So it's not just about having a pretty bar graph or a donut chart, but what could I be doing better today that can help me drive more leads or increase my revenues? And so we help really marketers uncover that through things like AI and machine learning and a whole bunch of fun stuff that we pack into the platform. So I know that was a lot, but that's how I kind of think about Datorama. Of what's actually working and how do we drive success across everything we do.
That's great. I think it's such a good intro to the product. And I think this is one of the things that we see, the challenges that we see in the market at the moment is that customers will say, oh, it's just another visualization tool, right? And what's the ROI going to be on it? We've already got something, or we're using Power BI or Tableau. Why Datorama? So do you think we could just drill on that question? If someone says, why would I use Datorama? How would you answer that question?
It's a question we get all too often. So like I was saying in my intro, I come from the world of traditional BI. So this question always strikes pretty home, and brings me back to some of my conversations I had very early on. So when we think about kind of traditional BI and Datorama, it's definitely not one or the other type of conversation, right? It's actually one and the other. So I can talk about Tableau as probably a pretty good example here, because Tableau is obviously part of the Salesforce family now as well. And I have always described Datorama and Tableau as kind of the Batman and Robin of the analytics world. And the reason I say that is independently, right? Both solutions are incredibly powerful, but the reality is they both tackle two very different use cases, right? So an enterprise BI solution is designed to tackle use cases for every department, for every single part of the business, and really to help you visualize data. Now, as you just heard me talk about Datorama, really Datorama is purpose-built for marketing, right? And it's so much more than just that visualization layer. It's how do I make sense of the data layer? How do I standardize my data sets? How do I then take that data and get insights and action from it, right? So how do I start to extrapolate areas of opportunity? How do I figure out what's working well? How do I figure out what to keep doing, right, from my marketing efforts? And so both solutions, Tableau, Datorama, and even things like Power BI, I've worked with countless customers where they actually have both solutions, right? So the marketing teams, performance marketers, digital marketers, anybody in the world of marketing will leverage Datorama to get quick and easy access to their marketing data and then understand what is working well through performance. And then the enterprise analytics team, right, can still leverage things like Tableau and Power BI and certain other business intelligence solutions for enterprise-wide analytics. And I think the best news is, right, Datorama is not this black box where data goes in and we don't know what's happening and it doesn't come out, right? Datorama is very much so connected to the entire analytics infrastructure. So when you really boil it down, right, why is Datorama different and what does it do? Well, at the end of the day, it tackles the marketing data complexities, right? The fact that there's so many different channels and languages and data sets across the world of marketing. And then it also allows us to understand what is working through things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, different pacing components we have within the solution. Again, purpose-built for marketers so they can effectively do their jobs in that fast-paced environment that is marketing.
That's great. I think it's something you touched there on, particularly around Tableau, because they are both Salesforce products. We also get this question as well is, well, I've got Tableau, do I also need Datorama? So maybe can we just drill in a little bit further on, if I've got Tableau or I'm thinking about both, are there specific use cases that you've seen where they work together, they complement each other, or how they compare to each other when you use one and not the other? Absolutely.
And I don't know what the exact statistic is, but I do know that it's incredibly high, right? The number of customers that actually have Tableau, which then onboard Datorama. And I guess it always comes back to the use case, right? And I think this is so important in the world of analytics. The question is always, well, what are the challenges that we're trying to solve? What is the use case we're trying to solve? And once we understand the questions we're trying to answer, right, we can provide the technology that is appropriate for those questions. Now, when we think about Tableau and Datorama, and Tableau, I don't think there's any arguing within the industry. Tableau is the creme de la creme of visualization solutions. So if you are tackling something that is not marketing related, or you already have a data warehouse and you are trying to visualize that data in an enterprise analytics fashion, right, Tableau, I would say, is the creme de la creme. Now, when we think about marketing, though, again, marketing brings with it a handful of challenges, right? All those different data locations. And actually, when you take a step back and you think about marketing, I think it's the only department within an organization where the strategy, I think, is constantly evolving, right? So the channels we had 5 years ago didn't exist today. Things like TikTok and Snapchat, right, and WeChat, and some of these solutions that are now so integral to our marketing strategy didn't exist a couple years ago. A couple years from today, right, we're going to have a whole bunch of solutions and channels and ways of communicating with customers that we don't even know about. So Datorama was really purpose-built to deal with this flexibility of these changing marketing channels and infrastructures and provide a scalable fashion to be able to understand that information. And then once it's been consolidated and unified, you can feed that into your native Datorama visualization layer, but it can just as easily feed into Tableau. And so it really becomes a connected and integrated analytics experience as opposed to having different silos and different data locations, right? It's the Salesforce analytics story, as I sometimes call it to my customers.
So that's really interesting. I guess what you're saying is it doesn't need to be either or, it can be both. And they both have different roles to play, Tableau and Datorama. In fact, you can use Datorama data to feed into Tableau. That's a really interesting soundbite that I just got out of that conversation, because I guess one of the big things around Tableau is you need to connect it to a data source, whereas Datorama is independently able to ingest data and do ETL. Is that right, or have I got that wrong?
Absolutely correct. And I'll give you a couple interesting examples, right? And I didn't really learn this until 4 years ago when I dove into the world of marketing. So when I came from traditional BI, we would tackle all kinds of use cases, right? Finance, HR, marketing, sales operations, anything with data, right? We could tackle those use cases. And when I switched over to the world of marketing, the naive thought was, how hard can it really be, right? It's just a couple marketing data sets. It's just one use case. It's just marketing. But when you really start to peel back the layers, there is so much inherent complexity when it comes to marketing data. So I'll give you a really simple example, right? Something as simple as how much you spend on a marketing platform can actually have 5 or 6 different names across the world of marketing. So it could be called media cost in one platform. It could be called media spend in another platform. You could have an internal system where it's recorded as media underscore cost, right? And most of my clients have 6, 7, 10 plus different names that they have across the entire infrastructure.
Yeah.
Well, how do you start to standardize that, right? And as your marketing strategy begins to scale and grow and you have more systems, more data, more complexity, this thing that seems so inherently simple starts to implode so quickly. And so what I learned really, really early on is that there is one thing that Datorama was purpose-built to do from day one, and that was deal with that inherent complexity within the world of marketing. And so every feature, every button, everything that you see in the solution has been purpose-built with that marketing point of view, right? To make sure that you can deal with the complexity, you can solve all types of marketing use cases. And when it comes down to it, right, that marketer is able to very quickly understand, well, what is actually working right now at this moment in time across every campaign, every channel, every single region and strategy and tactic that we're employing, right? So we can tie those marketing efforts back to ROI. I think that's what it's really all about.
So I think you've actually cracked a big challenge in the marketing BI space here, which is when you're going into a visualization project, and I've done plenty of them just like you have, we tend to run into these problems around data, because what we want at the end is the end result, the pretty pictures, but also the insight that comes out of that. But what people, I think, tend to realize when they start a project is, there's actually a lot of work to do on the data side of things here, right? So maybe then you've actually touched on a few great points. Datorama actually makes this a lot easier. It probably reduces a lot of time and complexity. What are some of the things that a customer might want to think about when they're implementing Datorama from scratch, in terms of maybe 2 or 3 big tips where you go, these are things you should really think about when you're doing this?
Yeah, and I think this, there's a couple actually. So in the last 4 years, I've probably seen over 50, 60 of these projects be implemented. And I think there's a couple learning lessons. I think, first and foremost, in order for any analytics project to be successful, we need to really understand what use case we're trying to tackle, right? I see a lot of customers understand the inherent need for a marketing analytics, a marketing performance dashboard, but a lot of them don't know where to get started. Now, this is where I think we bring a lot of expertise to the table, where we have lots of use cases that we've seen other customers tackle. So we are often in conversations guiding our customers to understand, well, what is the lowest hanging fruit, right? Where does it make sense for us to deploy this thing? Because at the end of the day, what we want to try to really drive towards is immediate results. So typically what we find with Datorama is that this is not a 6, 12, 18-month project, right? The goal is, how do we get you up and running in 90 days, potentially even faster, right? To show some immediate value, solve some immediate use cases. And once that foundation has been set, I think the funny thing in the world of analytics, once you uncover one stone, right, you keep going and you find more use cases and additional low-hanging fruit. So my recommendation is always, let's make sure as you engage in a project to really have an understanding for what is the initial use case we want to tackle. And the simplest could be, we've got a report that we create manually today. Maybe it's a performance report that is created in Excel. It's kind of shot up the executive chain. It's created bi-weekly, bi-monthly, whatever that frequency is. Let's recreate it in Datorama, right? Let's make it a heck of a lot better by allowing you to drill down into different regions and product lines and departments and really figure out those performances on an ongoing basis. And then let's automate that, right? So you are able to access that information every single day as opposed to bi-weekly. So that's kind of, I would say, recommendation number one. I think recommendation number two is really to have somebody in the project that actually understands the marketing data sets, right? So another good thing with Datorama, because it's purpose-built for business users as well as for marketers, the goal is really to start to alleviate the dependency of most teams on IT or analytics professionals, right? So I don't know if you've worked with some of these marketers, Jeremy, but typically, and what we find is marketers today are reliant on some IT or analytics professionals to ask questions from the data, right? So every time I want to ask a new question, I have to go back to my IT professional. They can create a new report. They can edit some of the reports, but as a marketer, I can't engage in some quick data discovery. Now, Datorama kind of flips that on its head. It's all about self-service data discovery. It's all drag and drop, point and click. So it makes it incredibly easy for that marketer to truly understand what's working well and what's not. However, in order to be successful, right, it's critical that somebody is in the project that actually understands the marketing data set. So typically in all implementations, what we advise our clients is let's have one kind of point of contact, one project lead that understands the marketing direction, that understands kind of the marketing strategy and the marketing challenges. And that, again, combined with the use cases, really leads us to a place of nirvana where we're able to get some quick value, but then also set that foundation for future growth.
You touched on something really interesting there around actually uncovering and discovering things as you go. So you might define an initial use case, but then all of a sudden these three other use cases pop up once you've gotten going. And it's something we see all the time. And it's a really hard conversation to have with the customer up front because they'll want to try and define ROI and use cases before they start. And one of the conversations I find I keep having is just define a couple, because once you've got a couple in, you'll see and you watch it, you're going to find 10, 15 others that you want, and we won't be able to go fast enough to get those up and running. Is that something you see as well with Datorama once you've got that first 45, 90 days out of the way?
And I think that's the methodology that we typically bring to most of our projects as well, right? So it's once you've set the foundation, and typically what a foundation in Datorama looks like is let's integrate our marketing campaign data, let's integrate our web analytics data, and potentially even some CRM and some email data to really get an end-to-end view of performances. But as soon as you set that foundation, right, a whole bunch of interesting things start to happen, right? People start to see the possibility and they start to think about, well, what if we start to introduce our traditional data sets, right? So we do things on the TV, radio, direct mail, print. Can we integrate those into Datorama as well? Well, the answer is absolutely, right? And we can start to bring in the traditional and the digital, and you can start to look at that relationship between the two. Or I think another really common use case that we start to see on the evolution journey is focusing kind of on the paid efforts out of the gate. But then obviously a lot of marketing teams focus on organic, right? So once you've got the paid campaigns in the platform, how do we start to bring in the organic stuff to start to understand those performances? And I think the last one that I'll quickly touch on, and which we've seen deployed with some of our large customers, is they set a foundation across their media campaigns, but then they want to really start to bring in that messaging data, right? So things like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Marketo or Eloqua data, right? Any sort of ESP provider that does messaging, email, SMS, how does that first party data actually start to combine with that third party data, right? And how do we create a unified view to start to understand full funnel analytics, to start to understand different touch point analyses, right? Which correlation and combination of touch points is actually leading people to convert within our funnel. I think this is when some really, really exciting use cases start to come up, right? But you have to have that foundation. And I always advise to my customers, let's set that foundation, right? Let's set that use case out of the gate. And once you've set that, I think the sky's the limit, right? And then we can start to get into some very, very interesting additional use cases.
I mean, that's powerful. Once you start combining online and offline and start with digital, start with a small use case, then bring all your traditional media spend in, start to analyze behavior across traditional media and digital, we're starting to get into really exciting territory there. You just mentioned as well, which is something that many people may not know, but you don't need to be a Salesforce Marketing Cloud customer necessarily to use Datorama. You can be an Eloqua, Marketo customer as well, because Datorama has a lot of these integrations built into it already. It's something that there's a lot of work being done integrating different platforms. So is that something you see as well? We have people that aren't traditional digital 360 customers saying Datorama's changed our business?
I think it's probably one of the biggest common misconceptions, right? Where customers think, oh, I need to have Salesforce Marketing Cloud implemented in order to leverage Datorama. Keep in mind, Datorama was an acquisition that happened, to your point, almost 3 years ago now, but Datorama is really data source agnostic. And I think this really hits home at our philosophy that marketers should be able to answer that question of what's working and what's not, regardless of what channels they use to execute campaigns, right? And so from a strategy perspective, Datorama can integrate any and all systems, to your point, Eloqua, HubSpot, Marketo, Salesforce Marketing Cloud. The goal is, how do we integrate anything and everything and incorporate it into the platform? I'll be honest, I've worked with a lot of customers over the last 4 years that have not been Salesforce Marketing Cloud customers, right? They have the Microsoft stack, they've got an Adobe stack, and Datorama still becomes a very powerful conversation to have, because I think at the end of the day, every marketer is still struggling with the analytics, right? Regardless of what the underlying technology is, marketers are getting pressed to answer that question of what's the ROI, what's the impact, and how do we become smarter with the dollars we're spending? So it's a very powerful and I think a very fun conversation as well to have with marketers, because I've always described it as the icing on the cake that can sit on top of any cake that you.
I think visual things are always exciting things. Isn't it funny that even in 2021, I still see it as well, just as you do, that the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges we have in marketing is visualization and insight generation through analytics, because it evolves so quickly and there's so much more data coming in now. And it seems to be one of the big challenges that CMOs are talking about. In saying that we don't have to have Marketing Cloud installed, though, there is a really neat integration, and a lot of our listeners are existing Digital 360 customers. But I think there's been a new release come out now that Datorama is embedded into Marketing Cloud. So do you want to talk a little bit about how Datorama and Marketing Cloud play together nicely as well?
Yeah, so there are a couple different integrations. As you might imagine, there is a native connector within Salesforce Marketing Cloud and Datorama. So any information, any activity, whether it's journeys or emails or SMS data, can feed directly from Salesforce Marketing Cloud into Datorama. And you can start to combine that with all of your paid media campaigns, your web analytics data, your traditional data sets, right, to really get that end-to-end view. That being said, to your point, Jamie, there was a release that just happened this month that you can find on the web as well, with a couple of demos where we are actually bringing some of those capabilities into the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So natively within Salesforce Marketing Cloud, any Marketing Cloud user can now have access to that very rich and powerful Datorama visualization layer, and can start to access their data sets in a lot more intuitive fashion, but then also can start to combine that and do some analysis. So if I want to bring in my web analytics data with my Salesforce Marketing Cloud data, right, I can natively do that within the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So some very, very interesting enhancements that are really bringing, I think, the analytics capabilities within our entire Marketing Cloud portfolio to that next step.
That's great. So it's almost like a taste for existing Marketing Cloud customers of what Datorama can do without giving away the whole thing, but saying, hey, it's worth looking at. And also, we're powering our own reports in Marketing Cloud now with this tool because it's so powerful.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And what's interesting, actually, you interesting point there. When you think about kind of eating our own dog food, keep in mind that Salesforce is a massive customer of Datorama's as well. If you think about Salesforce, we have a massive marketing team, and there have been a couple webinars where our team has actually gone and talked to the market about how we ourselves, the Salesforce marketers at Salesforce, are using Datorama to get that end-to-end view of performances. So we very much so as well are reliant on Datorama to understand kind of all of the performances at the large scale of Salesforce. So it's very interesting. If you haven't seen that webinar, I think it was a 30-minute session that our team hosted, kind of showing how the team here at Salesforce actually uses Datorama on a day-to-day basis.
We might actually get that link from you and put that up with the podcast as well, and just put it in at the end so people can have a look. I think that's great to see that Salesforce is using their own tools. Obviously, you'd think so, right? Data lake is what I wanted to touch on next. And it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. And Datorama has a data lake SKU. And people, I think, may get a little bit confused as to what that actually is. And people may say inside their business, I don't need a Datorama data lake. I've already got one, or I'm building one. But it's not quite a data lake in the traditional sense, is it? I'd like to touch on that and talk about what data lake inside Datorama is.
Yeah, and I think the best way to always talk about this is to take a step back, right? And typically what I do in most client conversations is really get an understanding for the use cases, right? So I think at the heart, as I was saying a couple minutes ago, the goal is always to understand, well, what are the types of questions I'm trying to answer as a marketer? Now, within the Datorama platform, for the first 3 years, we always looked at performance at the aggregate, right? So we would never bring user level information to the platform. PII data is not flowing into the platform as well. However, over the years, what we found is that there is certainly an ability to bring so much of that granular data, things like log level data, user level touch points data into the platform. And so the data lake feature is really just an extension of Datorama. And I typically don't talk to my customers about data lake. I talk to them about what data lake unlocks. And what it really unlocks is your ability to engage and understand and tackle use cases like path analyses, right? So which combination of touch points across different channels start to drive certain conversions, right? Do people typically touch a certain email campaign, then engage with the SMS, right? What does that combination of touch points actually look like across our ecosystem? If there are very granular data sets, right? So a very interesting use case for data lakes is if I've got very granular keyword level data that I need to start to filter by different geographies, right? To understand performances. We can do that incredibly fast within the power of that data lake and then shoot that back up to the visualization layer. So anytime we are stitching data together at a very, very granular level, data lake starts to unlock some incredible performance and power. A really good example here is we were working with a telco organization in North America, and this telco organization actually offers what's called a triple play, right? So as every telco, they provide internet, TV, and mobile technology services. Now that capability set isn't available in every single zip code, right? So from a marketing perspective, they are marketing across zip codes across the entire United States. However, realizing they only offer that bundle in certain zip codes, what they were able to do in Datorama is start to figure out, well, where are we potentially spending marketing dollars bidding on keywords in zip codes that don't actually offer that specific product feature? And so within Datorama, all of that very granular data was aggregated, it was brought in, and the marketer could very quickly see, okay, we actually are spending a significant amount of money. And I don't remember what the exact figure was. I think there may be a use case online somewhere. And it was a significant amount of money that the team was spending advertising in regions that they didn't even support the product. So some of these very granular, interesting use cases is what data lakes unlocks. And typically it's in that bucket, I would say, that we were talking about earlier, right? Once you've set that foundation of bringing in all of your campaigns and channels and activities, you can start to level things up with the data lake and get into some very interesting pathing analyses or granular media data sets. Again, there's some very, very interesting use cases that it starts to unlock.
So that sounds like what I'm hearing is let's not get tied up in what the name is and not get confused. Let's just talk about use cases and what it does. And then we can decide whether that's the right thing or not for your business, instead of saying, well, I don't need a data lake, I've already got one. Actually, let's talk about use cases and how we can help execute those inside Datorama, and we can work out whether we need that SKU or not, right? This is all great. I mean, I've actually learned a lot, and I've been working with Datorama now for a couple of years, but I think what would be really good too is where the rubber hits the road is use cases. So customers that use Datorama, and I'm sure with your 50, 60 customers that you've worked with at least, if not more, you've got a couple of great examples in there of where Datorama's come in and transformed and changed the business. Do you have anything you can talk to on customers for Datorama?
In the Singapore market, there's a couple that we work with. So folks like Rab, as well as Disney, are using the platform in the region. But one of the customers that I worked with very, very closely was actually a company called Hughes Federal Credit Union. If you're not from the United States, Hughes is a fairly small bank. So they're a credit union essentially, and they had a really small marketing team. So when I mean small, I'm talking about when we started first talking to them, we had 3 or 4 folks. And I think over the last 2 years, they've extended the team closer to 8 folks. But what that means is very small digital marketing team. And as a credit union, they used to engage in a ton of traditional ads. So I'm talking TV, radio, print, direct mail. That was really the bread and butter. And the organization realized 2 years ago, if we are going to keep up with the rate of change, right, with this change that's happening in marketing, we got to go all in on digital, right? And so they built out this digital marketing practice, again, spearheaded by 2 guys who have grown this thing to a team of 8. But the challenge was really straightforward, right? It was, once we launch these campaigns, we need to have the ability to measure success, right? And if we are not leveraging data to have that direct feedback loop and optimize and change our strategies quickly, right, we're going to be left behind. And so they onboarded Datorama, I believe it was 1.5 years ago now. And the team actually did a wonderful webinar with us about 3 or 4 months ago, and we can provide that link to you all as well, where Attila, who's their digital marketer, actually talked through and showed the reports that they have in Datorama. So they took what used to be 3 or 4 Excel reports that were created and entirely transformed them and built one dashboard in Datorama that showcases performances across every channel, every campaign, and actually what the success of those marketing campaigns were on driving business growth, right? So things like ROI by channel and campaign and by different product lines. And what they ended up doing in Datorama is not only automating that, right? So they automated these Excel reports, but they also increased the frequency. So instead of having to wait days, if not weeks, to figure out what was working, what was not, Attila and his team now has real-time access to all of that information. So as soon as a new campaign is launched, right, or something is put into the market, they have that direct feedback loop. And the last time I talked to them almost 6 months ago is that they were starting to take things to the next level. So step one for them, the foundation was, how do I bring in all of my paid media data, my web analytics data to understand things like my top of funnel conversions. Step two for them is all about integrating my bottom of funnel data. So they're going to start bringing in their first party CRM data sets so they can start to tie things like account opens back to those top of funnel campaigns. And again, I think this is the holy grail, right? So the analysis they can then do is, what's the ROI of a specific channel or campaign on driving account opens? Right, and they can start to do that again in real time on a daily basis and have that feedback loop as soon as a campaign is launched, instead of having to wait 2-3 weeks like they were doing before, living in those Excel sheets. And I think as their business starts to grow, right, they have this framework in place that will grow with them and scale with them as well.
That's such a cool story where you've got a customer that, because I guess one of the big things around visualization is people tend to think you put it in and then you're done and you just start looking at dashboards. But actually, there's a whole program of work that this company's put in place. They've been successful and they keep reinvesting back in the product and growing. It's just such a great story, and also one that I'm guessing is public from Salesforce perspective, so we can show it to some of our listeners as well.
Yeah, there's a case study in a PDF version. I think it's 2 or 3 pages, and they actually jumped on a webinar with us last year, and they took us through, and they took the listeners through what reports looked like before Datorama, after Datorama, the roadmap, and Attila actually talks about, why they even onboarded Datorama and why this was important. So we can definitely send a link to the viewers.
Seb, that's fantastic. We'll check the link in the comments. It's been great talking to you today, Seb, and thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have to spend some more time together because I think there's more to unpack here. But it's been great having you today on Marketing Mentors, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Jimmy.